Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. I'm just going to walk you through the stock market for Asia and Australia based on the close for September 22nd, 2025. Here's a brief bio about myself. I'm a CPA. I've been CPA since 1996, so I've been working with financial solutions and macro and micro indicators for well over 35 years. And I like to understand what's going on with the markets as I get engaged with my clients and prospects in terms of how they're moving forward with their long-term and short-term business strategy. So this kind of gives you where Australia ended on the 22nd of September. As you can see, the ASX 200, which is the big one I look at all the time, is up a little bit from the previous close, which would be Friday. But what's interesting here is where we're seeing the upside, which is materials, utilities, healthcare, communication, industrial, and information technology sector. Well, energy, real estate, and other areas are struggling a bit, and that was the consistency I saw on Friday as well. And it's something to bear in mind as we walk through and see what's going on with the quarterly reporting and other things happening in Australia as a whole. This gives you an idea the big gainers for over a year, as well as the key sectors. What's interesting in here, you're going to see Fortescue, RioTinto, and Lynas, because they're big into the rare metals. They took a little bit of interesting trend line last week because China started looking at reopening some of their huge lithium mines and production, and that's going to impact these companies in terms of their operations as well. If you look at the right side, as you're seeing Whitehaven Coal, you're starting to see down below too, where you're starting to see just some other companies that have had some struggles this year. Like Charter Hall Group has seen a sizable decline. It's something to bear in mind as you're balancing out your portfolio. Here's the Asia markets close, right? As you can see, Australia, the Nikkei, which is Japan, and Shanghai were up, where India faced some challenges because of the announcement late last week around the visa in terms of the cost of those visas. India does a lot of outsourcing for U.S. companies, which may require them to pivot on how they're exposed to the U.S. market, and that may impact their earnings because I've seen examples that their EBITDA being impacted by at least 50% if these changes go through on new. Again, there's misunderstanding of it. It's on new visas. It's not existing, but it will be interesting how that evolves on renewals as well. This shows you where the markets are up, and the highlighted in here is BYD fell. BYD is one of the bigger players in the e-vehicle market. Um, Basically, it's looking at where Warren Buffett's offloaded some of that investments, and Warren Buffett's like basically retired, but his investments through Berkshire Hathaway are constantly reviewed in terms of returns, and they shift money all the time. I wouldn't necessarily take this as a downside. It's just repositioning where he thinks there's more growth or opportunities. This also gives you an idea where basically Australia's economy, and I wrote something late last week about it, just like Canada, it's sluggish. It's dealing with stagflation where basically the inflation rate's higher than the economic growth. It'll be interesting with Australia how they pivot on policy because they've made significant commitments that they would be looking at the critical metals sector and how they best support it, and especially on the pricing. And you'll watch forward with this. Samsung's listed here as well because they're a huge chip maker. And they're looking at basically how they move forward with their solutions in terms of sourcing of their chips because of the U.S. government's impact around the whole chip market in terms of controlling supply and where investments being done. I just brought in India just to give you a quick oversight that because of the impact in the visa, it's impacting the stocks because companies are looking at the short term and future possible impact of these visas changes on their operations. Now, I've worked with my career where companies do have situations where they outsource, and I think this may end up impacting that because Trump is pretty well focused on nearshoring of jobs and investment. So he's going to want probably even pushed into underserviced areas. They were trying to do this in the past where they were looking at putting more technology jobs out in the Midwest, the rural areas, to take some of the pressures off the city. That's why we saw a rise in tech areas like in Boise, Idaho, Billings, Montana, and other areas to kind of pipe into that, as well as have people go where they can afford to live. This just gives you a little bit about the impact on these H-1B visas on India. As I mentioned earlier, it talks a bit about the margins and the revenue drop. And I've seen this throughout my career with consulting, because consulting can be finicky around outsourcing and just transfer pricing rules around how people do this. And there's also negative press that goes with this. People start to see this, and this comes back to your environment, social governance. Are you truly looking out for the best interest of, say, the U.S. economy? And there's people, consumers look at that, and they can make choices around that. So you might see a lot more pivoting on how workforce planning is done. Here's some additional links around my stock reports I did last week. I'm pretty much in tune to what's going on in the markets because I want to understand what's going on with my clients and prospects. Here's additional contact information about myself. You can reach out to me, as my goal is to work with medium, small-sized companies, whether they're at a startup phase, whether they're struggling with financial challenges. I like to be able to assist them and provide guidance because of my background with multiple areas of discipline.